Hi, everyone. Welcome to another workshop from the Writing Support Center. My name is Giselle, and today's workshop is titled Writing Concisely, How to Avoid Wordiness. If you have issues with wordiness in your writing, this workshop will certainly benefit you. So before we begin, I do want to give you some tips that will help you get the most out of this workshop. If this is your first time attending a WSC workshop, we typically have a worksheet that goes with the workshop. This worksheet is going to help you process information that you get from this workshop, and it'll help you internalize what you learn a bit more. You're also going to walk away with something that you can use in your writing if you do choose to revise some of your writing during this workshop. You can also give the worksheet to your instructor as proof if they are requiring you complete a workshop or if they are offering extra credit for workshop completion. You can download either the PDF or the Word version. You don't need to download both worksheets. You just need to download one. And it all depends on your preference. So if you prefer to fill out PDFs, download the fillable PDF. And if you prefer uh, using Word, then you would download the DocX worksheet. Just make sure to download at least one if you haven't already. And my second tip is to take your time. This is a recorded workshop, so you can always pause and rewind as you need to. And although we can't be face to face, there are some perks to viewing a recorded workshop, and that is that you can complete this workshop at your own pace. So, the goals for this workshop are surrounded around making you a more concise writer. The first goal is to help you define what it means to write concisely and identify the benefits of writing concisely. Goal two is to help you distinguish the elements of a concise paper. So, what does it mean to be concise uh, in a full paper, not just sentence level revisions? We're going to go over that. And goal three, I want you to be able to recognize and understand the various ways you can eliminate wordiness. And you will also revise a paragraph, either a sample one that I'm providing or one of your own for conciseness. And that is what we will be completing for today's workshop. So, just a quick introduction to what it means to write concisely. Have you heard any of these statements? Considering your instructor's comments on essays, have they written things like wordy, passive voice, filler, or irrelevant on your essays? If so, it might be a sign that you need to work on conciseness and eliminating wordiness. Why should you write concisely? Learning to write concisely will help you provide more substantive information in your papers. It also help you get to your point more promptly, and you'll be a clearer thinker and more engaging and effective writer. Conciseness applies to content and sentence level writing. I think often when we think of conciseness, we think of wordiness, but you can also have a paper that isn't concise, and that means not concise in your content, and that your argument might go in a bunch of different ways, and it isn't specific or um, it doesn't have a clear point to it, which we will go over in a bit. Other benefits of writing concisely is that it'll help your writing beyond essays, especially in terms of writing business letters, emails, resumes, cover letters, and more. So, writing concisely is a skill that can be used across all writing, not just the writing you're doing in your English class. So I want to start with a quick opening reflection. You're going to complete this on your worksheet. And in your reflection, I want you to think about your own writing style. In what areas do you feel you need to work on conciseness? And you can consider the following questions in your response. You don't need to answer all of them, but these are just some questions to get you thinking about your writing. So, are your ideas everywhere when trying to nail down an argument? Do you tend to use the same words over and over again? Do you use too many qualifiers, words like actually, really, and basically? Are you too wordy? Do you use academic sounding language without fully understanding the meaning of words? So go ahead and reflect. You can pause here, and once you're done, you can continue the video. All right, so I'm going to continue. I hope you had time to reflect on your writing process. Reflecting on your writing process is going to help you understand what you need to look for in terms of tips in this workshop, since I will be covering quite a few tips. But understanding your own writing style is going to help you identify where you need the most work and which tips you really need to latch onto and internalize. So, I want to start out with talking about writing concise papers, which is more globally the content of your paper. The reason why is because um, I want you to consider the content of your paper before you go into revising sentences. Revising your content before you begin on sentence level revisions is important because you may end up spending a lot of time on sentence level revisions only to find out you need to eliminate some of your paragraphs because they might not be relevant to your thesis. They might be extraneous information that you don't need. But it's important to look at your content before you go into revising sentences, just so you don't spend all that time only to find out you need to get rid of it. Concise writing means you must eliminate both extraneous content and sentence level wordiness. So I'm just going to talk about conciseness in your papers before I get into sentence level revisions. So, when thinking about making your papers more concise, you want to think about your argument first. When you write, ask yourself, what is the thesis of my paper? What components are necessary to prove my argument? Asking yourself these questions can help ensure that every paragraph in your essay has a purpose so that you're not providing paragraphs that don't really lead anywhere or don't help bolster your thesis. You really want to always keep your argument at the forefront of your mind when you are writing essays to help with conciseness. When revising, look at each paragraph and ask yourself if it's necessary for the thesis. This may lead you to having to cut some paragraphs, but in the end, your paper will be stronger because it will be more focused and easier to follow. You also want to think about your audience when you're editing for conciseness. Consider what your readers already know or need to know. For example, if your English 1A class has spent the last few weeks studying letter from Birmingham jail, you don't need to spend time outlining the whole history of the letter and the context. In the context in which it was written, because you can assume that your classmates and your instructor already are aware of the history of that letter. It's also a very famous letter, so you can assume that a lot of your audience will know where that letter comes from, right? MLK. So you don't need to provide extraneous information that's not going to help your argument. This also applies when writing resumes or cover letters. Instead of including every single job duty you might have performed at a certain job, you want to consider what skills are important to the job you're applying to. You only want to put in what is relevant to that job. Otherwise, you're wasting that person's time who's reading through your cover letter or resume. So, conciseness in content means really thinking about what you need in terms of getting your point across clearly and effectively. So, we're going to go into sentence level conciseness and what that means. These are the 5 different tips I will give you, and I'm going to go into more detail for each one of them. The 5 tips are eliminating redundant pairs, deleting unnecessary qualifiers, identifying and reducing prepositional phrases, replacing a phrase with a word, and identifying negatives and changing them to affirmatives. So, my first tip, eliminate redundant pairs. A lot of words imply each other without us realizing it. And there's a lot of redundant pairs that you are common that you might have already seen. Some of these include each and every, hopes and dreams, whole entire, first and foremost, true and accurate, past memories, various differences, basic fundamentals, true facts, end result. All of these are common redundant pairs, and what makes them redundant is that both words generally mean the same thing. For example, true facts, the word fact implies that it is true. So you wouldn't need a word like true there to show that they are true facts. Various differences, the word difference already implies that there are various things that are different about something. So that is redundant. Basic fundamentals. Fundamental is a word that implies something that is basic, so you don't need the word basic. First and foremost, that is a super common phrase that people use, and it first and foremost both mean the same thing, which is first. So you want to eliminate wordiness by getting rid of these redundant pairs. And to do that, you want to consider the meaning of both of the words and choose the word that communicates your point the best. So for the example, the wordy sentence reads, for each and every book you purchase, you will receive a free gift, which is a bookmark. Not a bad sentence when you hear it, but if you have a trained ear, you'll know that it is super wordy. The redundant pairs are underlined for you, each and every, and then free gift, each and every. You could cut down by getting rid of the word each, and then free gift. The reason why that is redundant is because a gift is usually free, so you don't need to put that word free in there. The revised version would read, for every book you purchase, you will receive a free bookmark. So, my second tip is to delete unnecessary qualifiers. Often we use qualifiers that aren't necessary to express our point. And by deleting those qualifiers, you can often eliminate one or two words per sentence. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if you constantly use qualifiers, eliminating them is going to help your essay read much more in a much flowier way than it would otherwise. So, some common qualifiers are things like actually, really, basically, probably, very, definitely, somewhat, kind of, extremely, and practically. I think these qualifiers are often used in conversation too. I use them a lot. I know that it's really easy to use things like basically, just like the image shows, but they are used to qualify what you're about to say, and they're usually not necessary. So you can always eliminate them in your writing to make it flow better. One example, this sentence has a lot of qualifiers. Uh, it reads, because a great many of the words in the sentence are basically unnecessary, it would really be a very good idea to edit somewhat for conciseness. I went ahead and underlined all the qualifiers in there for you. So, great many, basically, really, very, and somewhat. All of those can be eliminated because they are not necessary for the clarity and meaning of the sentence. And once you eliminate all those words, it will read, because many of the words in the sentence are necessary, we should edit it. So you can even see that that second part of the sentence, we should edit it, was edited down from, it would really be a very good idea to edit somewhat for conciseness. So not only did the qualifiers get eliminated, the second part of the sentence was shortened on its own. And that's something you can do when you revise. Sometimes you'll realize that, hey, I can even not only just eliminate the qualifiers, I can fully rewrite this sentence to make it shorter and more concise. So that's always something to consider when you are going to revise sentences. So, tip three, identify and reduce prepositional phrases. Personally, I think this is something I see the most are a ton of prepositions. And just as a refresher, prepositions are words that show location. So if you look at the table on the right, you'll see four different types of prepositions, which are in, on, at, from, to. And a prepositional phrase is when that preposition is put into a phrase. So, for example, in is taken and then put it into the prepositional phrase of in a province, in a country, in a city. That would be a prepositional phrase because it includes the noun. Same thing for on a road or device, or on a day, on a date, at a point, and then from a destination to a destination. So those are prepositions and prepositional phrases. And oftentimes students tend to use them a lot more than they need to. I know I do it personally. And when you use a lot of prepositional phrases, it can make your sentence clunky and unclear. So when revising, ask yourself, what am I trying to say here? And that might help you revise a wordy sentence. Sometimes, like I said in the previous slide, writing a new sentence is more efficient than trying to fix a preposition filled sentence. So sometimes you're just going to need to start all over if your sentence is full of prepositions. One example uh, that is worry. The reason for the failure of the basketball team of the University of California, Los Angeles, in the Final Four game against a team from Kansas was that on that day and at that time, some players were frequently unable to rebound the ball. So that sentence is filled with prepositions. I went ahead and underlined the prepositions, not the phrases, just because it would be a lot of underlining if I did the whole phrase. But I went ahead and underlined all those prepositions to show you just how many the student is using. And it really affects, you can tell how much it affects the way the sentence reads, but also the meaning and understanding that I get from the sentence. It's by the time I get to the end of the sentence, I'm unsure of what was the original point of the sentence. So it's really important that you eliminate those prepositional phrases in order to help that sentence flow better. If you eliminate those prepositions, it might look more like this. UCLA's basketball team lost the Final Four game against Kansas because it could not consistently rebound the ball. So you can see there's still prepositions in there. Obviously, this doesn't mean take out all the prepositions, just reduce the usage of how many you're using. But this writer actually revised the sentence fully and started from scratch, just as I suggested up above. Um, but you can tell this sentence is much shorter, but also much clearer. I understand the writer's point much quicker than having to go through all the prepositional phrases. So, tip four, replace a phrase with a word. Many phrases can be replaced with powerful and specific words. Some phrases are more formal in tone, but they detract from meaning. So, a common formal phrase that students use is due to the fact that. However, the word because is a much more concise substitution, and it really gets to the point much quicker. Other phrases are the reason for, in light of the fact that, given the fact that, and considering the fact that. I'm sure you can think of other phrases, but it also goes beyond just these common phrases. Sometimes we phrase out things that can be reduced to simple words. And if you scan your papers, I'm sure you'll find some phrases that you can just reduce down to a word. I know sometimes I did this as a student. I would write really long sentences because I wanted to meet a certain word count. However, when you do this, you're adding a lot of sentences and words, but you're not adding much meaning. And if you focus more on adding more meaning and understanding to your paper and analysis and evidence, your paper is going to be stronger than if you just fill it with phrases that don't really add to the value of your argument. So it's really important that instead of, throwing in a due to the fact that in every other paragraph to increase your word count, it's really important to avoid doing that and just focus more on developing your argument. So, an example I have here, Susie believed but could not confirm that Billy had feelings of affection for her. Someone might argue that that sentence actually sounds pretty like poetic or nice, but if you're trying to be concise, it can definitely be cut down to a much shorter sentence, and a sentence that gets the point across sooner. Because as I read that sentence, I get more attached to how it's worded than I am more than I'm thinking about what the person is trying to say. So I focus more on the wording than the meaning. And you want to always have your reader focus on um, the meaning than the wording, unless you're a creative writer, then the rules change. But in terms of essay writing, meaning should take precedence over. And what you're trying to say should take precedence over how you're wording it. And if you're throwing a lot of phrases in there, it's going to make it hard to understand what you're saying. So, a more concise version of this sentence would be Susie assumed that Billy adored her. So, a shorter sentence, but the meaning of the sentence is much clearer. Um, Obviously, I can understand now that Susie is assuming something about Billy's feelings versus the other sentence, it takes me a second to understand what it's saying. So, tip 5 is to identify negatives and change them to affirmatives. Expressing ideas in negative form means you must use an extra word. It also makes readers work harder to figure out your meaning. And like I've been saying this whole workshop, a lot of writing concisely means that you're getting your meaning across faster to your reader. So, using negatives is going to affect how quickly you get your meaning across to readers. Um, like I said, an extra word doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up if you're constantly doing it. So it doesn't mean you have to go and eliminate all your negatives and change them to affirmatives. But if you notice you're doing it a lot, it'd be smart to at least change a good amount of those. So one example, if you do not complete the assignment, you should not expect to pass the class, especially if you do not contact the professor beforehand about missing the assignment. So that sentence is very wordy. It takes a while to get to the point, and it's all in negatives. If you notice the first part of the sentence, it has a do not. The second part of the sentence should not, and the last part another do not. So it's filled with negatives, and it can be changed to affirmatives to make it more concise. Once you do that, it might sound something like, to pass the class, complete all the assignments and alert the professor of any late assignments. So I get the meaning much quicker. It's much easier to understand, and I don't need to take a moment to say, what are you trying to say? Um, so it's really important that you look for that, especially within sentences, because this writer used three negatives in one sentence. And you might be doing the same. You just need to read through your writing. So not only is it maybe you're doing it a lot throughout your writing, you might be just doing it in one sentence a lot. And it's important that you change that sentence to affirmative so that it reads clearer. Okay, so I do want to do one more activity. For this activity, you're going to pick a paragraph from one of your essays to revise. I strongly suggest you use your own writing for this activity just because it's going to give you not only workshop completion with the worksheet, but it's also going to give you something that you can use in your essay. You can use an essay you're currently writing, or you can use an essay that you can turn in for revision later. But I strongly suggest you use one of your own essays to revise because of those benefits. But if you don't have one, you can practice revising the sample paragraph below. Make at least 2 revisions for conciseness using the tips shared in this workshop. After you revise a paragraph, whether it's your own or the one below, reflect on the 2 revisions you made. What tips did you use to help your revision? How did these changes improve the flow, sound, and or meaning of your paper? So if you look at your worksheet, you're going to see 3 different spaces. One space where you can put the original paragraph. You can either copy and paste the paragraph from your essay, or you can type out the paragraph I wrote here. And then you're going to see a space for the revised paragraph, which is where you would put your revision. And then you're going to see a third space for your reflection, where you'll reflect on the 2 questions I have written here. So I'm going to go ahead and read the sample paragraph just in case you are going to use it. In my humble opinion, it should be noted by those promoting Pasadena City College that the students who go to PCC are really very fortunate to be getting an education in such a great school where they have access to a lot of super dynamic instructors that can help students get a strong education. Under circumstances in which we are remote, It is true that we cannot meet in person, which means we cannot connect well. In light of that fact, you can still get a quality education at Pasadena City College by using Canvas and also Zoom to connect with other students who are learning and instructors who are teaching. So you can use that paragraph if you don't have one of your own, but go ahead and take a few minutes to revise your paragraph or the one below and reflect on that revision. Once you're done, you can continue with the video. All right, so I hope you had time to revise and reflect on that revision process. Hopefully, you did find these tips useful. You can always go back in this workshop and look at the tips if you do need to remind yourself of what we went over. So that's the end of the workshop. I did want to give a shout out to the works that I did use in this workshop. I did rely heavily on writing concisely from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Um, the Writing Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has a lot of great resources. So not only should you check out this article, but you should check out their many other resources if you have questions on different writing topics. I also use conciseness from the Purdue Online Writing Lab, and the link is also there. Another great resource for writing if you do need to look up more articles about different writing topics. We also have our library here at PCC. So where you access this workshop on our Canvas page, you can look at our other workshops there along with our handouts. One element of conciseness that I did not cover in this workshop is passive voice, but we do have a separate workshop for that. So if you want to learn more about passive voice to make your writing a bit more concise, you can always look at that workshop. I hope you found this workshop useful. Thank you for watching, and I hope you attend our future workshops.